Charlotte stepped onto Fifth Avenue, her figure gliding seamlessly into the current of midday noon shoppers. On the surface, she looked like just another elegant woman enjoying the privileges of luxury. Her cashmere coat draped perfectly over her shoulders, tailored slacks flowing softly with each step, and understated flats grounding her presence. But beneath that calm exterior was a mind sharpened by decades in high-stakes boardrooms. She wasn't there to shop. She was there to uncover the truth. Everly and Company, her company, stood before her like a glass cathedral of luxury. The flagship store gleamed in the sunlight, its massive windows reflecting the chaos of the city while offering a glimpse into curated serenity. Mannequins posed like statues in a museum, dressed in the latest runway releases. Inside, marble floors shone like polished ice, diffusing the soft amber glow of designer lighting. The air was perfumed with jasmine, cedarwood, and wealth. It was a carefully orchestrated illusion, and something about it had begun to crack. Charlotte had received murmurs, anonymous tips, quiet emails, and concerning patterns in the employee satisfaction data from this very location. Though revenue continued to rise, the numbers behind the scenes told another story. She knew better than to trust spreadsheets alone. Numbers could be massaged, smiles could be rehearsed, but truth? Truth had a way of slipping through the cracks if you listened closely enough. As she crossed the threshold, a sales associate greeted her with immaculate poise. "Welcome to Everly and Company. Let me know if I can assist you." The associate's voice was syrupy smooth, eyes flicking quickly to Charlotte's outfit, likely evaluating her potential spend. Charlotte returned the smile, nodding politely. Her eyes, however, were already at work, scanning body language, posture, interactions. Something was off. The staff moved with synchronized precision, almost too perfect, like dancers on a tightrope. There was no ease, only tension stitched beneath the surface. Her gaze slid toward the back of the store, locking onto a tall glass office where a man stood with arms crossed, eyes like a hawk's, observant, predatory. Richard Blake, the store manager. She recognized the type immediately, the kind of leader who measured performance not by growth or mentorship, but by fear. She saw it in the way employees straightened their backs under his watchful gaze, not respect. Fear. Pretending to browse, Charlotte moved toward a nearby rack. A young sales associate, early 20s, perhaps, was assisting a customer who hesitated over an expensive blouse. The associate's smile was calm, but Charlotte caught at the tightness around her eyes, the slight clench in her jaw. "If you'd like, I can hold it for you until later," the associate offered gently. Her tone was accommodating, careful. Before the customer could respond, Richard's voice sliced through the ambient music. "That won't be necessary. If they're not ready to buy, they're wasting our time." Charlotte turned, watching him emerge from the office like a storm cloud rolling in. The customer, visibly embarrassed, placed the blouse back on the rack and hurried out. The young associate whispered an apology, her hands trembling as she rearranged the garments, trying to look busy. Charlotte's jaw tensed. The scene had played out in seconds, but the emotional impact lingered. This wasn't salesmanship, it was intimidation, the kind she'd once known all too well. Minutes later, in the dressing room, she stood in silence. Her fingers traced the hem of a silk dress she hadn't intended to try on. The scent of jasmine seemed cloying now, a mask hiding the rot beneath. Then, voices. A confrontation. "This is the third time this month, Emily. Do you think I'm running a charity here?" Charlotte froze. The voice responded, barely audible. I just needed time off for my mother. She's in the hospital and A loud slam followed, clipboard against hard surface. "I don't care if she's on life support. You're here to sell, not to make excuses. If you can't handle pressure, maybe I start cutting your hours, or better yet, hire someone who wants the job." Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. that voice again. Richard. Her fingers curled into fists, the fabric crumpling in her palm. Years of hard work had gone into building a brand meant to uplift and inspire. Not this. Not fear-mongering. Behind the thin wall, she imagined Emily, a young woman, shoulders hunched, uniform wrinkled from anxiety, biting back tears as she tried to defend not just her schedule, but her dignity. Charlotte remembered being Emily. Not in this store, but in another life. When she was just another ambitious black woman trying to break into an industry designed to keep her out. The condescension, the dismissals, the silent demand to be grateful for less than she deserved. And now, decades later, it was happening in her empire. She steadied herself, exhaling slowly. This was no place for fury, not yet. If she wanted real change, she needed to see everything, to dismantle it from the inside, piece by piece. She stepped out of the dressing room. The tension still hung in the air. Richard lingered nearby, his smugness palpable. Emily stood stiffly, hands clenched, her eyes locked on the floor like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. It was time, but not for confrontation, for revelation. And Richard Blake had no idea the reckoning he'd just summoned. Charlotte didn't need to hear more. Emily didn't argue. She didn't protest. She had learned the hard way, like so many others, that pushing back only made things worse. Resistance, even when justified, came at a cost. And when your job was the difference between paying rent or falling behind, silence often became the only armor left. From where she stood, Charlotte watched Richard's lip curl into something disturbingly close to satisfaction, like he was feeding off the discomfort he had just caused. There was something about the way he lingered there, tapping on his phone like nothing happened, exhaling sharply as if irritated by even the act of discipline. Charlotte fought the urge to confront him. Her fists remained unclenched, her face a mask of calm. Instead, she turned toward the mirror wall, pretending to adjust the belt of her coat, all while using the reflection to observe the fallout behind her. Emily, shoulders stiff, retreated into the store's maze of racks, her movements robotic, like someone running a script they were too tired to rewrite. She was no longer a person, not in that moment, just another part of the display. Richard didn't give her a second glance. The smirk remained as he returned to his phone, oblivious to, or perhaps fully aware of, the damage he inflicted. Charlotte didn't walk toward the exit because she was leaving. No, she moved because she needed a better vantage point. Something far deeper than a single toxic manager was at play. If this rot festered here, how many more corners of her company were infected? Her pace was deliberate, each step weaving between the pristine aisles like a woman lost in a shopping reverie. But Charlotte was far from lost. Her fingers glided over display tables, her gaze scanning each face, each interaction. This wasn't shopping, it was reconnaissance. She noticed the fear, how the staff flinched under Richard's gaze, how conversations abruptly halted when he passed, how even their smiles looked painful, like masks stretched too tight. One associate, probably just out of college, rushed by with a stack of folded shirts. His walk was hurried, not with purpose but fear. His shoulders were too tight, his eyes flicking side to side. He wasn't being efficient, he was being hunted. Then came the moment that confirmed everything Charlotte had feared. A mid-30-ish associate stood near a display case assisting a well-dressed woman. The customer touched the sleeve of a cashmere coat. I'm not sure, she murmured. The associate paused, barely perceptible, considering how to respond, but it was already too late. If she's not buying, move on, Richard barked. Loud, sharp, humiliating. The woman recoiled slightly, lips parting as if to defend herself, but no words came. Instead, she stepped back with a small nod, her hands clasped in front of her, an unconscious act of self-protection. The customer glanced between them, her face clouded with unease, then quietly placed the coat back and walked away. Charlotte watched it all unfold. Richard didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge the discomfort he had caused. To him, this wasn't a mistake. It was routine. The sales associate's shoulders trembled as she turned and quickly exited the area. Charlotte's chest tightened. That wasn't discipline. That was emotional erosion. Charlotte shifted toward the accessories section, her eyes locking onto a familiar figure. Emily. The young woman stood at a display of scarves, her hands busy straightening fabric that was already perfectly aligned. Her fingers moved in slow, repeated strokes, a sign not of pride in her work, but a quiet desperation to stay occupied, unnoticed, untouched. Charlotte approached slowly and picked up a scarf. "This color is beautiful," she said casually, allowing the silk to slip through her fingers. Emily looked up, startled, then quickly composed herself. "It's one of our best sellers," she replied, her voice steady but overly rehearsed. "Made from imported silk, hand-woven, lightweight but strong." There was knowledge behind her words, but no life. She spoke as if her spirit had been muted, confined within the walls of acceptable answers. "You seem to know your products well," Charlotte noted gently. "I try," Emily said quickly. "How long have you been working here?" "Almost 3 years," she answered without hesitation, though her voice carried a practiced detachment. "That's impressive. You must enjoy it here." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Emily's face. Conflict. Her shoulders tensed, her eyes darted slightly away, and then a forced smile returned. "It's a great company," she said, the words hollow. Charlotte didn't push. She didn't need to. Fear didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it was silence. She gave Emily a nod and moved away, wandering near the stockroom entrance. That's when she saw her. A woman in her 40s essence, holding a folded uniform shirt in trembling hands. Her eyes were puffy and red, lips pressed into a tight line. She wasn't just finishing her shift. She was saying goodbye. Charlotte edged closer, just enough to hear a hushed conversation with another associate. "I don't have a choice," the woman murmured. "They said my numbers weren't good enough, that I wasn't." She stopped, her voice breaking. "It doesn't matter." "That's not fair," the other whispered. "It's business," the woman replied, but the words were empty, lifeless. Charlotte didn't intervene. Not yet, but her mind spun. How many like her? How many had been forced out? How many warning signs had gone ignored because the numbers kept rising? She turned and headed deeper into the store, no longer just watching, investigating. She had spent nearly an hour drifting through her own empire, witnessing not excellence but exploitation. The elegance of the surroundings couldn't mask the despair that coated every interaction. Then she saw the next moment unfold. A well-dressed couple browsed the luxury handbags, flipping over price tags, discussing preferences. The husband, salt and pepper hair, turned to the associate near them. "Arthur, I'm not sure this suits my wife's style. What's—" Charlotte's attention shifted to the luxury handbag display just as a man asked, "What's your return policy?" The associate David, a tall, composed man in his early 30s, straightened, shoulders square, and responded calmly. "Returns are accepted within 14 days provided the item is unused and in original packaging." The customer seemed content with the answer, a simple transaction nearly complete. Until Richard's voice sliced through the calm like a jagged blade. "That's not how we sell here." Charlotte turned instinctively. Richard was striding across the floor, every step fueled by the need to dominate the space. He was the kind of man who spoke louder when he wanted silence and moved faster when he sensed he was losing control. David stiffened. His hands, once relaxed, now clasped in front of him in a quiet, defensive posture. Richard stopped mere inches away, flashing a performative smile at the customers before locking eyes with David. They had started filming, and it turned slow because of the heat. "Did you even try to close the sale?" Richard's voice was calculated, not quite a shout, but loud enough to ensure everyone nearby heard. "Or did you think answering a question was enough?" David's jaw tensed. You didn't mention exclusivity. Didn't explain this is a limited release. Once it's gone, it's gone. Or are you just handing out return policies now?" The customers exchanged glances, the energy around them shifting to discomfort. Richard noticed, but he didn't care. His focus was singular: humiliation. "You know what? Don't come in next week." His tone was shockingly casual, as if he were talking about the weather. "If you can't meet expectations, there's no point in keeping you on the schedule." The air around them turned to stone. Charlotte's heart pounded as she watched David inhale, chest rising with a forced breath meant to keep composure. His fists clenched tightly at his sides, knuckles bone white. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He knew it would only get worse. Richard smirked, self-satisfied, and walked off as if he'd simply checked another item off his to-do list. Charlotte's gaze locked on David. He was unraveling, not with noise, but with restraint. He was breaking in silence. And then, out of the shadows, came Emily. She stepped beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't keep doing this," she said. "We can't just stand here and take it." David let out a dry, bitter laugh. "What choice do we have?" Charlotte saw it then. Something shifting in Emily. Not just fear, not even frustration, but resolve. A storm building from within. Charlotte had worn that look too. Years ago, when she was dismissed, underestimated. When a manager made her feel small, irrelevant, she had hit a breaking point. And from it, she rose. That's the thing about thresholds. Cross them, and you're never the same. Emily was at her edge, and Charlotte knew it was time. She could no longer observe from the sidelines. She'd built this company to stand for something greater, and somewhere along the way, the mission had eroded. It wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about a culture that had rotted from the inside. A system that had made people like Richard feel untouchable. But to change it, she needed more than conviction. She needed proof. She began quietly weaving through the store, starting conversations, her tone light, questions casual. Years of negotiation had taught her how to extract truths from silence. David was the first to open up, cautiously. He stood near the stockroom, hands in his pockets, every word weighed. "They call it performance-based scheduling," he muttered. "But it's just punishment. Miss your numbers, your shifts vanish." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, "So they hang your hours over your head." Davy's jaw flexed. "To keep us desperate." Later, she found Emily again, this time folding sweaters. Her motions were slow, robotic. Charlotte approached with warmth. "You're always this quiet?" Emily hesitated. "Just trying to stay focused." David mentioned something about the scheduling. Sounds intense. Emily's hands froze over the fabric. "You have no idea," she whispered. Charlotte leaned in. "Try me." Emily looked around cautiously, then lowered her voice. "It's not just ours. It's how he turns us against each other. One day he praises someone in front of the team, makes them feel special. The next, he tears them down, tells us someone else is getting promoted, even if they're not." Charlotte felt her stomach twist. This was worse than she thought. He keeps us paranoid, always trying to be the one who's safe. "No one trusts anyone," Emily added. Charlotte didn't respond right away. because she understood. She had seen this method used in the highest corporate towers: divide and conquer, instill fear, breed insecurity, and no one would unite against the person at the top. Richard didn't lead through strategy. He ruled through psychological warfare. But the final blow came when she passed by the break room. The door cracked open. Voices. She stopped, not on purpose, instinct. "I don't care how they feel," said one voice. "Just keep them in line. If they start slacking, we replace them." "Richard," another voice answered, hesitant. But these numbers, our revenue is up 10%. Richard cut in. "You know why? Because I don't let them get comfortable. The second they think this job is safe, they stop trying." Charlotte's heart pounded. Bombed, but HR is starting to bring them to themselves. The higher-ups don't care about some whiny sales associates. They care about results. That's why we're here. Keep them scared. Keep them working. Charlotte stood frozen. There it was, the final piece. Richard wasn't just a problem. He was a byproduct of a system she had unwittingly allowed. And unless she uprooted it all, another Richard would rise in his place. Her next move wouldn't just be about fixing this store. It would be about reclaiming her vision. Charlotte exhaled. It was time to burn the rot out, completely. Charlotte stepped quietly away from the break room door, her heartbeat a slow, pounding drum in her chest. Every instinct told her that this was no longer a matter of policy. It was a reckoning. She couldn't just confront Richard. That would only address the symptom. No, she had to dismantle the entire framework that allowed men like him to flourish. What she had uncovered wasn't just abuse of power. It was a culture of fear that had been nurtured, protected, and possibly even rewarded. She returned to the heart of the store with renewed clarity, her hand brushing over the polished glass counters as if in thought. Richard stood a few feet away, engaged in shallow conversation with another manager. But Charlotte saw the way his eyes roved, ever calculating, like a hawk assessing its prey. "No more pretending." She stepped forward, closing the distance. Her tone was smooth, laced with the quiet authority of someone used to getting answers. "I have a question." Richard turned, his corporate smile snapping into place like armor. "Of course. What can I assist you with?" Charlotte gestured toward the elegantly lit handbag display. "I've been a customer for years. I've always wondered, what exactly sets Everly and Company apart beyond the branding?" He didn't miss a beat. "Efficiency. We don't just sell luxury. We deliver an experience. Fast, flawless, focused." "And that experience?" Charlotte tilted her head. "It includes pushing your employees to work fast?" He smiled wider, the mask beginning to crack. "Quick, strategic, focused. They know how to close a sale, not just entertain window shoppers." "And if they fall short of those expectations?" He hesitated for half a second, just long enough for the truth to peek through. "They work in retail, ma'am. They're here to serve, not to feel comfortable." Charlotte's stomach twisted, but her voice didn't falter. "And if someone struggles?" Richard's gaze hardened. "Then maybe retail isn't for them. We can't hold everyone's hand. We're not here to coddle. We're here to sell. If they can't take the pressure, they're welcome to leave." There it was, raw, unfiltered, the ideology laid bare. Employees weren't humans to him. They were tools, replaceable, disposable. Charlotte's throat tightened, but she maintained her composure. "Interesting approach," she said, her voice cool. "I imagine it's very productive?" Richard nodded, pride swelling. "Exactly. That's why we outperform the competition. We weed out the weak. Only the best stay." Charlotte met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. He had no idea who he was speaking to, no clue that this moment, this exchange, would be the beginning of his unraveling. She walked away, each step purposeful, her pulse steady despite the rage bubbling beneath. Richard wasn't simply arrogant. He was a product of a deeper flaw. A culture that rewarded cruelty when it delivered profits. That evening, Charlotte stared out over the glowing city skyline from her hotel suite, her phone pressed to her ear. "I need the most recent employee performance reports for the Fifth Avenue location. Turnover rates, scheduling data, any complaints filed against management, everything." There was a pause. Is this about Richard Blake? Her grip tightened. This is about more than Richard Blake. She hung up, her breath slow and measured. The next morning, Charlotte sat at her desk, a hot cup of coffee untouched beside her laptop. The reports were worse than she'd imagined. Turnover at the Fifth Avenue store was 40% higher than any other location. Scheduling practices were erratic and punitive. Complaints against Richard had been filed repeatedly. Dozens of them, and every single one had been ignored. It wasn't just unchecked, he was protected. She had built Everly and Company to stand for something more than wealth, and now one of her crown jewels had become a factory of exploitation. She needed more than documents. She needed voices, testimonies. That day, she went back into the store and spoke to her employees again, this time with more purpose. Casual at first, drawing out truths like threads unraveling. Most were hesitant, clipped answers, guarded eyes. But a few, David and Emily, had already reached the edge. "I don't know why you're asking," David muttered as he arranged a display. "Nothing's going to change. Richard's protected. Always has been." Charlotte's jaw clenched. Emily was more cautious. "People get fired for saying the wrong thing. I know at least 3 who left because of him and not because they wanted to." That was it. The ones who had already been pushed out. That's where she would find her proof. Later that evening, Charlotte waited in a quiet corner of a cafe, the rain streaking the windows. She had spent hours combing through records, making calls. One name kept surfacing. Lisa Carpenter. 5 years at the Fifth Avenue store, forced out last year. Official reason, low performance. But according to David and Emily, she'd been one of the best. Lisa arrived, her posture tense, her eyes wary. She slid into the booth, gripping her coffee like a lifeline. "I don't know why you wanted to talk," she said. "I don't work there anymore. I don't owe that place anything." Charlotte nodded. "I understand. But I also know you didn't leave by choice." Lisa let out a bitter laugh. "No, I did." She stared into her cup. "I did everything they asked. Met my targets, trained new hires, worked overtime. And then one day, Richard decided I wasn't performing. A surprise is ordered. A change in plan. Hit movement." She scoffed. "Turns out my numbers were fine. Better than fine." Charlotte leaned in. "Then why?" Lisa's smile vanished. "Because I didn't play along." Charlotte didn't need to ask what that meant. She already knew. Lisa's shoulders slumped, but her voice grew stronger. He wanted control, total control. Anyone who questioned him, or even just refused to kiss up, was gone. Quietly, without cause. Charlotte's pulse quickened. She had the data. Now she had the story. And soon she would have the power to change everything. Lisa's final words haunted Charlotte as she stepped back into the pulse of the city. Richard wasn't just manipulative. He was systematically eliminating threats, favoritism cloaked in policy, sabotage disguised as discipline. Charlotte had feared it. Now she knew it. Lisa's voice had trembled, but the details were razor sharp. Richard created false performance records. He lowered scores without cause. He fabricated complaints, knowing how easily corporate would accept the paperwork. By the time anyone reviewed it, it looked clean, like the employee had simply failed. Charlotte clenched her fists. It was a revelation, but also a threat. If Richard caught wind that someone was peeling back the layers of his narrative, he would bury everything. She couldn't afford delay. She pulled out her phone and dialed corporate. "I need the original employee files from the Fifth Avenue store," she said briskly. "Everything Richard Blake has submitted for the past 2 years. I want to compare them against the performance data I already have." A pause. "Is there an issue with Richard?" the voice on the line asked. "You could say that," Charlotte said, and ended the call. Meanwhile, inside the store, Emily had grown accustomed to invisibility. It was a skill she'd honed. Not too loud, not too quiet, just enough to survive. But lately, something had shifted. She could feel Richard's eyes more often, lingering longer, his scrutiny tightening. The first sign came from Nicole, a colleague with a sharp eye and quieter instincts. "Be careful," she murmured during a morning shift, her hands rearranging a rack of scarves. "Richard's asking about you." Emily's stomach dropped. "Why?" Nicole hesitated. "You're not as quiet as you used to be." Emily's chest tightened. She had tried to be discreet in her conversations, but maybe she had let too much show. Maybe Richard sensed the change. She didn't have long to dwell. Emily. The word stopped her cold. Richard stood at the end of the hall, motioning her into his office. Her legs felt numb as she followed him, the door shut with a soft but decisive click. The air inside was different, sharp, oppressive. Richard leaned against his desk, arms crossed, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know you've been talking," he said almost playfully, but the tone underneath was a threat. Emily blinked. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult my intelligence," Richard said. He pushed off the desk and moved closer. "I know how this works. A few whispers here, a few sympathetic glances. Then someone complains to corporate." Emily balled her fists, struggling to stay composed. "Let me remind you," Richard continued, voice lower now, darker. "Who decides your schedule? Who decides if you stay or go?" He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Think your job is secure? I can make sure you don't work in retail again." Emily's mouth was dry, her chest tightened. Richard's smirk widened. "If you're smart, you'll keep your mouth shut. No more complaints. No more wrong conversations." It was a threat she felt in her bones. She gave a tight nod, too afraid to speak. Richard stepped back, opening the door. "Good girl." The word stung. Emily stepped back onto the sales floor. The lights too bright, the room too loud. The store hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She had been seen, marked. She no longer felt invisible. She felt trapped. Charlotte noticed it immediately. Emily moved differently now, like a wire pulled too tight. During Emily's break, Charlotte followed her into the stockroom. She found her gripping a stack of sweaters, her fingers ghost white against the fabric. "Emily," Charlotte said gently. Emily flinched. Then, recognizing her, tried to recover. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Emily hesitated, then something in her gave way. "Called me into his office," she whispered. "He knows I've been talking." Charlotte stayed silent, letting the weight of the moment rest. "He told me to keep my mouth shut, that he could get rid of me. He said he could ruin me." Charlotte's gut twisted. She'd expected retaliation, but hearing it still burned. "You know that what he's doing is wrong," she said, her voice firm but kind. Emily gave a bitter laugh. "Of course I do, but what am I supposed to do? He controls everything." Charlotte stepped closer. "I need to tell you something. I've been gathering information, reports, testimonies. I'm building a case against him." Emily's breath caught. "What?" Charlotte nodded. But I need someone on the inside. Someone who can help. No. Emily backed away, shaking her head. If he finds out, I don't have a backup plan. I can't lose this job. Rent alone. I know, Charlotte said, her voice soft but urgent. But how much longer do you think you can survive like this? Emily didn't answer. Charlotte took another step forward. I know you're scared. But silence only protects him. Protects him, not you. Not David. Not the others who've already been pushed out. Emily looked down at her hands, visibly torn. You don't have to answer now, Charlotte added gently. Just think about it. With a final look, Charlotte turned and walked away, leaving Emily alone in the stockroom, surrounded by silence and the weight of a decision only she could make. The days that followed were a storm inside Emily's mind. She hadn't slept properly since that conversation. Her thoughts twisted between fear and defiance, uncertainty and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Charlotte wasn't like the others. She didn't whisper about change. She moved like someone who could make it happen. And for the first time, Emily began to believe maybe she didn't have to endure forever. Maybe she had a choice. So she made one. It started with small changes. She didn't shrink away when Richard passed. She didn't hide in silence. She observed. She listened. And when his tone turned sharp or he whispered threats under his breath, Emily was ready. The first recording was shaky. Her fingers trembled as she activated her phone's voice memo feature, tucking it deep into her pocket. You think this is a democracy? Richard's voice crackled later that night from her phone. You hit your targets or you get out. I don't keep dead weight. The second recording was clear. If you want hours next week, prove you deserve them. The third made her sick. A conversation with a young associate, Luis, who'd struggled that week. You like working here, don't you? Then don't make me question why I hired you. I can replace you tomorrow. Emily met Charlotte that evening in a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away. When she slid her phone across the table, Charlotte didn't speak, she simply listened. Each word Richard had said filled the silence between them like smoke. Charlotte's face remained composed, but Emily could see it in the tension of her jaw, in the way she gripped the phone tighter with each file. When the last recording ended, Charlotte exhaled. This is good, really good. Emily hesitated. So, what now? Now, Charlotte said, her voice steeled with purpose. We take this to someone who can make it count. The next morning, Charlotte entered Everly & Company's corporate headquarters. Polite smiles greeted her as she passed, but behind her calm demeanor was the fire of a woman on a mission. She was led to a glass-paneled office where Mark Atwood, Senior Director of HR, waited with an easy smile. Charlotte, he greeted. Didn't expect to see you so soon. What brings you in? Charlotte took a seat, setting her handbag carefully beside her. I have something you need to hear. She pulled out her phone, pressed play, and let Richard's voice fill the room. The air shifted immediately. Mark's smile faltered. He leaned forward as each sentence struck like a hammer. By the time the final recording ended, he looked stricken. Charlotte spoke evenly. That's just a fraction of what's been happening at Fifth Avenue. Mark rubbed his hands over his face. This is bad. It's worse than bad, Charlotte said. That store has the highest turnover in the company. Employees aren't quitting. They're being pushed out. Mark nodded, visibly shaken. I knew there were complaints, but this... Someone's been burying the reports, Charlotte said sharply, and Richard didn't do it alone. Mark stiffened. Who? That's what I need you to find out. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll open an investigation. Not just any investigation, Charlotte replied. A real one, because if this system isn't fixed, it'll cost you more than bad press. He met her gaze. This stays between us, for now, but I need time. Don't take too long, Charlotte warned, because if I don't see movement, I'll handle it myself. As she walked out of the building, the unease crept back in. Richard wouldn't fall quietly. If he even sensed a threat, he'd destroy the evidence and tighten his grip. And Charlotte knew this wasn't about one man anymore. It was about dismantling everything that had empowered him. Back at the store, Richard was already sensing the shift. He had spent years building a fortress of fear, one where silence meant survival. But now, whispers paused when he walked in. Eyes looked away too quickly. Emily especially. She was different. Quieter, yes, but no longer broken. She was biding time. Then came the email. The request from HR. Performance records, employee reports, complaints, all for Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue! Richard's alarm bells went off. He moved fast, called a store-wide meeting, unusual, sudden, the break room filled with tension and tired eyes. He stood at the front, surveying them like a general before battle, his eyes locked on Emily. She was near the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched. She was the weak link. Effective immediately, Richard announced, Emily Carter is no longer employed at Everly & Company. Johnson clicked his heels. Silence fell. A quiet gasp followed. Emily's face drained of color. Richard barely concealed his smirk. Unfortunately, he continued with false regret, her numbers haven't met our standards. As you know, we expect performance. Then, a shift. Charlotte stepped forward from the edge of the room, the murmurs halting around her. Richard didn't notice her at first, until he saw the way the room was reacting. She walked to the front, calm and composed. That's interesting, she said, her voice clear, because I've been observing Emily closely these past few days, and from what I saw, she was one of your most diligent employees. The room stilled. Richard frowned. Excuse me? Charlotte took another step. You didn't recognize me, did you? Richard chuckled, dismissive. And who are you exactly? I'm Charlotte Hale, she said, holding his gaze. CEO of Everly & Company? Silence. A thunderclap of realization swept through the room. Every head turned, every back straightened. Richard's face paled. And just like that, everything changed. Richard's entire expression collapsed in an instant. His once confident stance crumbled, and his jaw parted slightly before snapping shut, the full weight of the moment crashing into him like a tidal wave. Charlotte let the silence stretch, let it sting, then delivered her words with razor precision. And you, she said evenly, just fired an employee I personally evaluated. Richard blinked rapidly. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. But no one moved. No one came to his defense. You're lying, he said, though the words lacked conviction. Charlotte reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a sleek, leather-bound notebook. She flipped it open and pulled out a document bearing her signature. Holding it up just enough for him to see, she tilted her head. Still think I'm lying? A thin sheen of sweat broke out across Richard's brow. I'd like to hear the real reason you fired Emily, Charlotte continued, voice sharp with authority, because it's obvious it had nothing to do with her performance. Richard's face paled. All eyes were on him now. Some employees looked shocked, others cautiously hopeful. They knew this store bore Charlotte's name. It had never truly belonged to Richard. He opened his mouth, desperate to salvage control, but no words came out. For the first time in years, the man who dictated every rule was now being rendered powerless. Charlotte turned to Emily, her voice soft but firm. You're not fired. Emily released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands shook slightly as she nodded. Charlotte looked around the room, letting the tension breathe. If anyone here has something to say about how this store has been run, now is the time. The silence lingered, thick with fear, until David stepped forward. I don't think I've worked a single day here without feeling like I was walking on eggshells, he said, his voice steady. Richard made sure we all knew we were replaceable. People left, and no one could stop him. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Charlotte turned her eyes back to Richard. You've had free reign over this store for far too long, she said. That ends now. Richard clenched his fists. You think you can just... I don't think, Charlotte interrupted. I know. He stepped back, his composure cracking. He tried to regain his footing. He always knew how to regain control, how to twist perception just enough to make himself indispensable. He straightened up, forced a smirk, and said, Let's all take a breath. The employees didn't move. I get the tensions are high, he continued, but everything I've done, it's been for the store, for the company. He waited for a nod, for support. None came. I followed policy, he insisted. Eberly and Company expects results. If someone can't meet those expectations, that's not on me. His gaze locked with Charlotte's. Under my leadership, this store has hit record numbers. If I'm gone, who's going to keep that up? He turned back to the staff, trying to rally allies. I pushed because I believed in you. David, you remember, your first month here, you couldn't close a sale? But now? Top seller! David didn't budge. His jaw tightened. His hands stayed buried in his pockets. Richard was losing them. So he played his final card. You really think corporate cares about any of this? He snapped. If I leave, nothing changes. The next manager will be worse. They'll push harder. That's the system. A pause. Then Charlotte stepped forward. You're right about one thing, she said. The system is broken, and yes, you're a product of it. Richard let out a short laugh. Then firing me doesn't fix anything. Charlotte didn't smile. Instead, she pulled out a thick folder. No, she said. Firing you isn't the solution. But exposing you, that's a good start. She placed the folder on the counter, flipping it open. Documents spilled out. Performance reviews, altered schedules, falsified disciplinary actions. And then she held up her phone, pressed play. Richard's voice echoed. You either hit your targets or you get out. I don't keep dead weight. The store was silent except for his own words, now weaponized against him. Emily stepped forward. Her voice quavered, but her spine was straight. He made us feel like we didn't matter, like we were tools to make him look good. I just kept doing it, David added. I watched coworkers break down in that stockroom, people who gave years to this place, just discarded. Others joined in. Voices once silenced now rose in unity. Richard stumbled for footing. This is ridiculous, he spat. I didn't write the rules. Every company does this. Everly's not the only one pushing numbers. He turned to Charlotte, pleading and aggressive. You can fire me, but it won't change a damn thing. Charlotte met his eyes. You're right. The problem runs deeper than you. Richard straightened, smirking as if he'd gained ground. But you, she continued. You're where it starts. The smirk vanished. I've already spoken to corporate, she said. There's a full investigation underway into you, your files, your entire record. Richard went pale. And the next manager? Charlotte's voice was steel. It won't be someone like you. Richard's breathing turned sharp. You think you're untouchable because you're in charge? The board doesn't care about this. They care about profit. Charlotte offered a quiet, unwavering smile. That's where you're wrong. They care about me." It hit him hard. She wasn't just a CEO in name. She was the architect of the brand, the power behind every storefront. And she wasn't going to let him or anyone like him corrupt it further. Richard saw the truth, and he knew he had lost. But something in his eyes flickered. He straightened, one last twitch of pride in his broken posture. "You might have taken me out," he murmured, voice low and bitter. "But this isn't over." Charlotte didn't flinch. Not when Richard hurled his final threat. Not when he tried to twist the moment into a power he no longer had. People like Richard never went quietly. They clung to control like a lifeline, and when it was stripped away, they flailed. But Charlotte had faced worse before. She wasn't afraid of his desperation. She was ready for it. She stood tall in the heart of the store, surrounded by the remnants of his reign. The weight of her decision echoed through the silence, but she didn't waver. The employees, once too timid to meet Richard's eye, now looked to her with hope and awe. Richard, once the embodiment of arrogant control, looked undone. His usual smirk had been replaced by something raw, something real. He'd believed himself untouchable, but he had misjudged the woman who built the empire he tried to corrupt. Charlotte faced him fully. Effective immediately, she declared, her voice calm but resolute. "Richard Blake is no longer employed at Everly & Company." A ripple moved through the crowd, gasps, shocked glances. This wasn't just justice. It was revolution. And Charlotte wasn't just another executive. She was the foundation, the architect, the one person who had the authority and the courage to reshape it all. Richard's fists curled. "You can't just—" "I can," Charlotte interrupted, "and I just did." She turned toward the security guard near the front, a tall, composed man in a crisp uniform. "Please escort Mr. Blake off the premises." The guard stepped forward. Richard backed away instinctively. "This is insane," Richard snapped. "I built this store. Without me, you'll lose everything." "Exercise makes overtrained." "Exercise means Charlotte's expression didn't change. "You didn't build it. You drained it." The guard placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder. "Sir, it's time." Richard scanned the room for someone, anyone, to save him. No one moved. Even his former supporters stayed silent. His grip on the store had been severed. As he was led out, past the employees he had controlled for years, not one person stepped forward to defend him. No goodbyes, no sympathy. Just silence. Then he was gone. Charlotte turned back to the room, her eyes meeting theirs one by one. "This doesn't stop with him," she said. "What happened here should never have been allowed, and I intend to make sure it never happens again." She pulled out her phone and dialed. "No pleasantries," she said into the receiver. "I want a full audit. Every store Richard Blake managed or influenced. I want performance reviews, complaints, scheduling histories, all of it. Go back 5 years. If this happened here, it happened elsewhere." The voice on the other end stammered. "Understood." She ended the call and turned back to her staff. Effective immediately, the practice of using reduced hours as punishment ends. No one's livelihood should be used as leverage. Relief washed over the room like sunlight through a storm. "Next," Charlotte continued, "we're creating a new position, a workplace advocate. Someone you can go to if there's a problem. No more fear, no more retaliation." David let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Emily stared at him, stunned. "This is really happening," she whispered. Charlotte wasn't done. "We're implementing a protected reporting system. Complaints will bypass local management entirely and go straight to corporate. No more burying voices. You will be heard." As the staff began to disperse, the energy in the store shifted. People stood straighter, spoke louder. The weight had lifted. Something had been reborn. Charlotte turned to Emily. "You did more than you think," she said softly. "You didn't just help take him down. You proved change is possible." Emily hesitated, then stepped closer. "Does that mean you'll need help with these changes?" Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I want to be part of it," Emily said. "Not just work here, help build something better." A slow smile spread across Charlotte's lips. "How do you feel about being assistant manager?" Emily's eyes widened. "Me?" Charlotte nodded. "Someone I trust. Someone who cares." Emily swallowed. "I never thought someone like me would get a chance like that." "Then let's make sure more people do." Later that night, as Charlotte stepped out into the city, she let out a long, quiet breath. The storm had passed, the battle had been won, but she knew the war wasn't over. Richard had been right about one thing. He wasn't the only one. There were more like him, in other stores, in other cities, and the system had protected them. But she had built Everly and Company once before, and now she would rebuild it, one store at a time. The next morning, Charlotte arrived at corporate headquarters. The tension hit her like a wall. She hadn't even taken off her coat before the summons came. A mandatory meeting. Regional directors, senior executives, finance. There was no agenda. That told her everything. The conference room was all clean lines and artificial calm. White walls, glass windows, modern silence. But Charlotte knew better. Power wasn't in the words. It lived in pauses, in glances, in who spoke and who didn't. At the head of the table sat Gerald Whitmore, CFO, the man who smiled like a lawyer and calculated like a chess master. "Charlotte," he began, smooth as always, "we all appreciate your passion. Your leadership has shaped Everly and Company in profound ways." Charlotte said nothing. Gerald leaned forward. "There are concerns. The termination of Richard Blake. The policies you implemented. It's been abrupt." "Necessary," Charlotte corrected. Another executive, Susie Patel, sighed. "We're not saying Richard wasn't a problem, but you acted without consultation. Managers are nervous, employees are talking, and now complaints are spreading." Charlotte's voice was calm. "Good. Let them talk. That means they're no longer afraid." Glances were exchanged. Unease shifted through the room. Gerald tried again. "Everly is a business. We have structures, procedures. This spectacle, it's made shareholders nervous." Susan added, "What happens when one complaint takes down a manager?" "What happens to stability?" "I'm not taking down managers," Charlotte said. "I'm taking down abusers, and if they're afraid, it means they know they're guilty." Then came a new voice, cold, powerful. "I propose we drop this investigation entirely." Charlotte turned. Howard McAllister, Senior VP of Operations. Old money, deep ties. The kind of man who survived regime changes without moving a muscle. "We don't need a company water audit," he said. "It's disruptive. It sends the wrong message." Charlotte's hands tightened against the table. "The wrong message to whom?" Howard shrugged, calm as ever. "To investors, to shareholders. This kind of scrutiny makes Everly and Company look unstable." Charlotte didn't flinch. His warning landed, sharp and bitter, but she had faced worse storms, and she had endured. This was far from over, but she would not step back now, not when so many were still watching, not when the ground beneath Everly and Company was finally shifting. He turned slowly, letting the silence thicken around her. Richard, once so smug and untouchable, now stood exposed. His usual arrogance had crumbled, replaced by something far more human. Fear. The empire he had ruled with whispers and threats was gone, and the woman standing in its ashes was the very one who had lit the match. "Effective immediately," Charlotte announced, her voice calm but echoing with finality. "Richard Blake is no longer employed by Everly & Company." The reaction was instantaneous. A ripple of gasps, widened eyes, disbelief, and then a stunned stillness. Richard opened his mouth, sputtering, his bravado reduced to hollow defiance. "You can't just—" "I can," Charlotte interrupted, her tone steel. "And I just did." She turned to a uniformed security guard at the entrance. "Please escort Mr. Blake off the premises." The guard nodded, already stepping forward. Richard stumbled back, his eyes darting to the crowd for support, but none came. The employees who once feared him now stood silent, watching justice in real time. He had no allies left, no one to shield him. "You're making a mistake," he growled, his voice rising in desperation. "I built this store. Everything you see here is because of me." Charlotte's eyes never wavered. "You didn't build this store, Richard. You bled it dry." With a firm hand on his shoulder, the guard guided Richard toward the exit. His steps were slow, heavy with reluctant defeat. He passed the employees, the very people he had once controlled, and none of them looked away. They watched as the man who ruled with fear was finally removed. No applause, no farewell, just silence. And then he was gone. Charlotte turned back to the employees, their faces a mix of awe, shock, and something new, hope. "This doesn't stop with him," she said. "What happened in this store shouldn't have happened, and I intend to make sure it never happens again." She pulled out her phone and called corporate. When the line picked up, she didn't bother with introductions. "I want a full audit," she said. "Every store, managed by anyone Blake hired or trained, turnover rates, complaints, everything from the last 5 years. If this happened here, it's happening elsewhere." There was a stunned pause on the other end, then a quiet, "Understood." She hung up and addressed the room. "Effective immediately, we're ending the practice of reducing employee hours as punishment. No one's livelihood should depend on a manager's mood." A ripple of quiet relief spread. "And there's more," Charlotte continued. "We're creating a new position, workplace advocate. Someone you can go to safely when something's wrong. No more fear, no more silence." Emily and David exchanged a glance, one part disbelief, one part awe. Charlotte went on. "We're also implementing a protected reporting system, bypassing local management entirely. Complaints will go straight to corporate. From now on, you will be heard." As the crowd dispersed, something shifted in the air. Conversations returned, but this time they were louder, freer. There was laughter, hesitant at first but growing. The fear had lifted. Later, Charlotte approached Emily. The young woman stood behind the assistant manager's desk, signing off on schedules, her posture firm, her demeanor confident. "You did more than you think," Charlotte said. "You didn't just take him down. You proved that real change is possible." Emily looked up, swallowing hard. "Does that mean you'll need help with all this?" Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I want in," Emily said, a nervous smile creeping across her lips. "I don't just want to work here. I want to help fix it." Charlotte nodded slowly. "How do you feel about a promotion?" Emily blinked. "Wait, seriously?" "Assistant manager," Charlotte confirmed. "Someone I can trust." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I never thought someone like me would get this kind of chance." Charlotte's expression softened. "Then let's make sure more people do." That night, Charlotte stood by the panoramic window of Everly & Company's flagship store. Below her, the floor buzzed with a new kind of energy, one built on trust, not fear. But she knew this was just one victory. The real war, the one inside boardrooms and old networks of power, was still raging. She had barely returned to headquarters when the resistance began. An emergency meeting was called, and she was summoned. No agenda, no explanation, just a room filled with sharp suits and hidden motives. At the head of the table sat Howard McAllister, CFO and guardian of the old guard. "Charlotte," he began, all polite smiles, "we appreciate your passion, but your changes, they're making the company look unstable." She remained calm. "Unstable to whom?" "To investors," Howard said, "to shareholders." And there it was, not concern for the people, just fear of the bottom line. One by one the others chimed in. Unilateral decisions, they called them. Radical reforms. Disruptive leadership. Charlotte listened, unmoved. "Howard," she said quietly, "if we don't do this, we're telling our people that we value profit over their well-being." Howard smiled. "Isn't that what companies are supposed to do?" That silence told her everything. He wasn't just an obstacle. He was a protector of the very rot she was trying to root out. The boardroom battle escalated. Accusations, counterpoints, power plays. And then came the article. Leaked, calculated, smeared across every business outlet. Is Charlotte Hale destroying Everly from within? It was war. But Charlotte didn't retreat. She called in Jonathan Pierce, the quiet manipulator, the shadow behind Richard. "You really thought you could tear it all down without consequences?" he asked. "I expected better enemies," she replied. He presented his own slides. "Revenue drops, nervous managers. You're bleeding the company," he said. Charlotte calmly countered. "Employee retention up, lawsuit risk down, long-term gain." She ended the debate with one final slide. $12,700,000, 0 cents, paid out in settlements under his watch. And then the board voted. Jonathan was removed. The battle was over. But Charlotte knew better. It was only the beginning. She stood again at the top floor of the flagship store, watching, reflecting, rebuilding, and across from her sat Emily, confident, empowered, proof that the system could be changed. "Do you think it'll last?" Emily asked quietly. Charlotte didn't hesitate. "It'll last because we'll fight to make sure it does." Because in the end, power wasn't about control. It was about the courage to create something better. And that's what Charlotte Hale had done. She hadn't just changed Everly and Company. She changed what it meant to lead. And now the only question left was, how many more systems could be rebuilt if more people dared to try? Subscribe for more true stories of defiance, change, and courage, the kind that show us what real power truly looks like.